My name is Claire, and for 10 years, I thought our savings were shrinking because of bad luck, rising prices, one setback after another. I blamed the economy. I blamed our mortgage rate. I never once blamed the single lease sitting quietly in a folder in my husband's filing cabinet, a lease with his signature on it, for an apartment I had never heard of, in a name I recognized instantly. I was 39 when I found it, and for a long time I believed the worst part of my marriage was simply feeling like we never had enough money. I was wrong. The worst part was learning that for an entire decade, enough had already been decided, just not for me. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, subscribe to Unheard drama stories, where the people who were kept in the dark finally get to see everything clearly. And quickly, drop a comment and tell me, what city are you watching from tonight, and what country? I love seeing just how far these stories travel. Mark and I married when I was 29. He'd had a serious relationship before me, a woman named Vanessa, together for 6 years, engaged briefly before it ended badly. He rarely mentioned her. When he did, it was always the same tired line. That's ancient history. I never questioned it. Why would I? We built an ordinary life, a house, 2 kids, a joint account we both deposited into faithfully every single month. Except somehow, faithfully never quite added up. Some months we came up short by a few $100s. Mark always had an explanation ready: car repairs, a work expense, a slow month for his freelance clients. I believed him, because doubting your own husband over a few $100s felt paranoid, almost cruel. Stay with me, because the folder I found that morning didn't just explain the missing money. It rewrote every year of our marriage I thought I understood. I found it by accident, looking for our car insurance paperwork in his filing cabinet while he was at work. Behind the tax documents was a manila folder labeled in his own handwriting, V. Apt. Inside was a residential lease, renewed year after year, the earliest one dated 3 months before our wedding. The tenant listed was Vanessa Reyes. The person listed as the guarantor, the one legally responsible if she ever missed a payment, was Mark. I sat on our bedroom floor and did the math with shaking hands. $1,100 a month for 10 years. That number alone came to over $130,000. Money that should have gone toward our children's college funds, toward the kitchen renovation we'd never been able to afford, toward the retirement account Mark always insisted we simply couldn't grow any faster. I didn't call him. I didn't scream into an empty house. I made copies of every page, took photos with my phone, and put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. Then I opened our bank statements from the last 3 years and finally saw what I'd never let myself really look for: a recurring transfer, disguised under a vague label, going out the same week every single month. That night, I asked Mark, as calmly as I could manage, whether he was still in contact with Vanessa. He said no, almost too quickly. Why would you even ask that? I told him I'd found the lease. His face did something I'd never seen before. Not guilt exactly, more like a man watching a wall he'd spent 10 years building suddenly crack down the middle. Real quick, if you're still with me at this point in the story, let me know where you're watching from. I always read through the comments after these go up, and it genuinely means a lot seeing this reach so many different cities and countries. He said Vanessa had gotten sick early in our marriage, a serious illness, expensive treatment, no family nearby to help her. He said he'd agreed to cover her rent just for a few months while she recovered. Those few months apparently became a decade, because by the time she was better, he said, stopping felt cruel. And by the time I might have found out, he was terrified of exactly this conversation. I asked him the question that actually mattered to me, not why he'd started, why he'd never once told me. He didn't have an answer that wasn't some version of, I didn't want to lose you. As if a decade of secret payments was somehow the version of our marriage that would keep us together. I asked whether they were still involved romantically. He swore they weren't, that it had become just financial. Like that phrase made it better instead of worse. I didn't fully believe him yet. I still don't know if I fully believe him now. I hired a forensic accountant before I hired a divorce attorney, because I needed the truth to have numbers attached to it, not just his version of events. The accountant traced transfers going back the full 10 years, through 3 different bank accounts Mark had quietly opened and closed along the way, each one timed suspiciously close to whenever I'd started asking questions about our budget. This wasn't a man who'd made one compassionate decision and let it spiral. This was a man who had built and maintained an entire second financial life and had gotten quietly better at hiding it every single year. I met Vanessa exactly once in a coffee shop because I needed to hear her side directly instead of only Mark's carefully managed version. She looked as uncomfortable as I felt. She told me the illness had been real years ago and that she'd offered more than once to start paying Mark back once she recovered. He always told her not to worry about it. She admitted, quietly, that some part of her had known this arrangement wasn't entirely normal. But she said it was easier not to ask questions when someone else was making your rent disappear every month. I didn't hate her by the end of that conversation. I hated that she'd been allowed to stay comfortably confused for 10 years, the exact same way I had. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Not only because of the money, though $130,000 is not a small betrayal. I filed because Mark had spent a decade making financial decisions that shaped our entire family's future, and had done it in complete secrecy, protected by a folder he assumed I would never think to open. The court treated the payments as a significant dissipation of marital assets. My attorney argued, successfully, that money funneled to a third party without my knowledge or consent should be counted against Mark's share of our estate. It won't return everything we lost. But it mattered to me that a judge looked at the same folder I had and called it exactly what it was. Mark still tells our mutual friends it was complicated, that he was simply trying to be a decent person to someone who once mattered to him. I don't disagree that decency matters. I disagree that decency requires a decade of silence toward the person who trusted you completely with the truth of your own life. My daughter asked me recently why Dad and I don't live together anymore. I told her the truth, in words small enough for a 9-year-old to hold. Sometimes people make a choice and are too afraid to tell the truth about it, and staying afraid for too long can break something that honesty might have saved. She thought about that for a moment and said, "So he should have just told you." "Exactly," I told her. "He should have just told me." I think about that filing cabinet sometimes, how ordinary it looked, how many mornings I walked past it making coffee, never once suspecting what 10 years of silence could fit inside one manila folder. I don't check locked drawers anymore, not out of some newfound trust in anyone, but because I've learned something more useful than suspicion. The truth doesn't stay hidden forever. It just waits for the day you're finally looking in the right place. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever discovered that your trust was quietly being spent behind your back, remember this: love does not require you to stay confused. Subscribe to Unheard Drama Stories for more.